911 location of your emergency.
Hi, something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
I've had some dreams of her. There's times where I prayed and asked God to see her another time, and I did, and it just gives me some peace knowing that I know she's okay.
4 very, very important names in this case: Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And if you're gonna remember any names from this case, I ask that it be all 4.
The University of Idaho, once a place of life, excitement, and unspoken possibilities, stood quietly beneath the frostbitten sky of November 2022. Its iconic campus, with its leafy walkways and academic buildings stretching into the horizon, was the backdrop to countless aspirations and dreams. To the outside world, it was just another peaceful college town nestled in the northern reaches of the United States, a serene place where young people gathered to build their future. Yet, this tranquil facade would be forever tainted by a horrific event that would leave a permanent scar on the town of Moscow, Idaho. It was supposed to be the start of something bright, a moment in their lives that would mark the beginning of futures full of potential and hope. Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, 4 college students, had dreams of making their mark on the world. Kaylee, with her warm, outgoing personality, had already begun to forge a path in her chosen field, passionate about her career ambitions. Madison, known for her infectious laugh and vibrant spirit, was studying marketing, dreaming of a future where she could make a difference in her own way. Xana, the thoughtful and creative soul, was carving out her niche in the world of business and design, and Ethan, the embodiment of kindness and dedication, had his sights set on a future filled with family and love, hoping to give back to his community as a part of the university's budding relationships. Each of them had something special, a light within them that shone brightly, making the world around them a little bit brighter. But on that cold November night, everything changed. As the chill of late autumn gripped the town, the unthinkable happened. The lives of these 4 young individuals, bright, ambitious, and full of life, were violently and abruptly stolen from them. In the space of one tragic evening, their futures and the dreams they held were extinguished. It was as if a shadow had fallen upon the university, casting doubt and disbelief in its wake. Moscow, a town where tragedy had never truly struck before, was shaken to its core. It wasn't just the brutality of the murders that left the community reeling. It was the sheer unexpectedness of it all. Students, faculty, and families all were left grasping at answers that at first seemed so elusive. How could such a terrible act happen in such a peaceful place? How could someone take the lives of these young individuals, students who were only just beginning to make their mark on the world? And yet, the true shock lay not only in the murder itself, but in the chilling realization that these were not random acts of violence. They were targeted, calculated, and carried out with a ruthless precision that left investigators and the public alike scrambling to understand the motives behind them. Who would do such a thing? What would drive someone to such extremes? The questions only began to pile up in the days and weeks following the murders. No one could understand it. No one could fathom why this had happened to 4 young lives with so much promise. The truth behind their deaths was more complex and unsettling than anyone could have imagined. As authorities worked tirelessly to uncover the details of the crime, the community's fears grew stronger, while the families and friends of the victims were left to wonder, who had done this? And more importantly, why? The true answers to these questions would take time, and as the investigation continued, the chilling depth of the tragedy slowly began to unfold, revealing an unsettling web of secrets, connections, and motives far beyond what anyone could have predicted. It was an event that would change not only the lives of those involved, but the entire town of Moscow, leaving it forever marked by the nightmare of what had happened that fateful November night. Moscow, Idaho, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of the Palouse, a place where the quiet hum of nature mixed with the rhythmic beat of college life. It was a town that prided itself on its peaceful atmosphere, where the streets were lined with mature trees and the air always felt fresh and crisp, especially in the fall. The University of Idaho, a symbol of hope, aspiration, and education, stood proudly at the heart of this tight-knit community. It was a place where young minds were shaped, futures were forged, and families believed their children would be safe and secure. Moscow, with its cozy downtown, welcoming locals, and low crime rate, was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and greeted strangers with a smile. The fall semester was well underway, and the small-town charm of Moscow shone brightly as students hustled to finish their assignments, attend their lectures, and prepare for the upcoming Thanksgiving break. A sense of relief was in the air, the promise of a brief respite from the demands of academia before the holiday season took hold. The trees were ablaze with autumn colors, and the crisp breeze that whispered through the campus offered a welcome reprieve from the heat of the summer months. Life seemed idyllic in this quiet corner of the world, with little to disturb its calm rhythm. However, the comfort of this serene environment would soon be shattered. The peace that defined Moscow would be violently interrupted, and the lives of 4 young people, students with dreams and aspirations, would be ripped from the heart of the town, leaving everyone in a state of disbelief. The tragedy that would unfold was not something anyone could have imagined, least of all in a place like Moscow. On November 13, 2022, as the clock neared 3 a.m., the first call for help came, a call that would forever change the trajectory of the town's history. It was a call that pierced the night, breaking the silence of the campus and sending a ripple of fear through the community. 4 students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were found dead in a home that should have been a safe haven, a place where they had gathered to enjoy their last night before the break. The events of that night were as horrific as they were incomprehensible. What was supposed to be a peaceful and joyful time for these students, who had so much ahead of them, turned into a scene of unimaginable horror. The fact that this tragedy occurred in Moscow, a place so familiar with safety, only the victims, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were far more than mere college students. They were individuals with bright futures and unique dreams, each walking a path that promised personal and professional growth. Kaylee Goncalves was a force to be reckoned with, someone who had set her sights on a future in marketing. Ambitious and outgoing, she had a natural talent for understanding people, a gift that would have served her well in the corporate world. Kaylee had a magnetic personality, one that could light up a room with ease. Born and raised in Idaho, she had always been close to her family, particularly her younger sister, whom she had always tried to protect. Despite the intensity of her academic pursuits, she balanced it all with an unwavering loyalty to her loved ones. Her dream was to build a successful career that would not only bring her personal satisfaction, but also make a difference in the world. At just 21, she had her entire life ahead of her, and her future looked incredibly bright. Madison Mogen, also 21, had an infectious laugh and an outgoing nature that made her the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. A marketing major like Kaylee, Madison had a love for the creative process and a talent for connecting with people. However, more than her academic drive, it was her deep love for her family that defined her. She often spoke about her parents and her younger siblings, and it was clear that she saw herself as a caretaker, always putting others' needs above her own. Madison's friends and family described her as someone who would always go the extra mile, someone who would brighten your darkest day. She planned on making an impact in the world of business, and if anyone had the potential to reach the top, it was her. Xana Kernodle was the artist of the group, an ambitious young woman with a passion for design and entrepreneurship. At 20 years old, she had a dream of becoming a successful businesswoman, and she was well on her way to making that dream a reality. Xana was a quiet force, known for her deep-thinking nature and determination. She had an eye for beauty and design, constantly seeking new ways to express herself through her work. Despite her reserved personality, Xana had a strong and tight-knit circle of friends who admired her for her kindness and ambition. She had a future filled with potential, and she was determined to carve out her place in the world. Her relationship with Ethan Chapin was one of love and mutual respect, and they often spent hours together talking about their future plans. Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, was a gentle giant, known for his easygoing nature and his deep love for those closest to him. As a member of a fraternity and a lover of the outdoors, Ethan was well liked by everyone who crossed his path. He had a deep bond with Xana, and together they were the perfect pair, two young people with big hearts and bigger dreams. Ethan's family was his anchor, and he took great pride in his role as the protective older brother. Ethan was always there for his friends, quick to offer support and comfort when needed. His future seemed filled with promise as he and Xana navigated their last year of college together, planning to build their lives and careers side by side. While the four victims were different in many ways, they shared a connection that went beyond their time at the University of Idaho. Kaylee and Madison were roommates, best friends who had lived together for years and forged a bond that many others envied. Xana and Ethan, the loving couple, had plans to make their relationship last long after graduation. The group had formed an unbreakable bond, and their shared experiences were a testament to the strength of their friendship. But even within the harmony of their lives, there were subtle tensions and conflicts, some of which went unnoticed by the rest of the world. It was in these overlooked moments, these fleeting interactions, that the seeds of something unexpected may have been sown. And then there was Brian Kohberger. Brian Kohberger was, on the surface, just another student at the University of Idaho. He had enrolled in the criminal justice program, a subject that seemed to fascinate him given his interest in law enforcement and criminal psychology. On paper, his path seemed straightforward, a young man studying a field that could lead to a respectable career. But as time would show, Brian's interest in criminal justice may have been more than academic. It may have been part of a darker fascination that would later come to light. Born and raised in Pennsylvania, Brian had been described as introverted and somewhat detached. He had a history that was marred by social struggles and behavioral issues. Friends and family reported that Brian had always been an oddball, never fully fitting in with those around him. While he had managed to secure a spot in the criminal justice program at the University of Idaho, there were whispers about his troubled past, his struggles with maintaining relationships, and his tendency to draw attention in all the wrong ways. By all accounts, Brian seemed to live a solitary life, but this didn't mean he was without notice. He had made his way into the town's fabric in subtle ways, gaining access to various parts of the university community. There were reports of strange encounters with people who had crossed paths with him in the past. He was known to have observed others closely, and some said that he had a strange fascination with the victim. Though no direct connection could be made at first, it became clear that Brian's interactions with the world around him were more calculated than anyone had realized. As the investigation into the murders unfolded, it became apparent that Brian Kohberger's background was filled with warning signs. A troubled past, an intense interest in criminal behavior, and unsettling interactions with people, all painted a picture of a man who was both fascinated by and disconnected from the world of crime he studied. The question that would eventually arise was, could this fascination have driven him to commit such an unthinkable act? But even before Brian's name was publicly connected to the crime, there were whispers about the victims' lives. Tensions, while not overtly apparent, had started to creep into their social circles. Social media posts, unspoken conflicts, and subtle signs of stress had begun to show up in the weeks leading up to the crime. Were the victims simply living their lives, unaware of any danger? Or had there been signs, small, unspoken moments that hinted at the violence to come? Did their normal activities, like a trip to the food truck, a late-night walk home, become the last moments they would spend in peace? There was a troubling question that lingered in the air. Had Brian Kohberger ever crossed paths with the victims before? How had he gained access to their home? Did he stalk them from a distance? Was this premeditated, or had it been a spur-of-the-moment decision driven by a sudden need to act? The last moments of the victims' lives are shrouded in uncertainty. They had been at the food truck, enjoying their last moments of normalcy before heading back to the house. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a scene of unimaginable violence. The details of those final moments remain hauntingly unclear, but one thing is certain: something had triggered the night's horrific events. The escalating tension was palpable in the days leading up to the crime. Social circles were tested, relationships strained, and the everyday routines of the victims were interrupted in ways they couldn't have imagined. As they made their way home that fateful night, no one could have known that they were walking straight into a nightmare that would change their lives and the town of Moscow forever. As the investigation unfolded, the haunting question remained: what had driven Bryan Kohberger to commit such a horrific act? Was it personal, random, or something much more calculated? The quiet murmur of anticipation filled the courtroom as the trial of Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of brutally ending the lives of 4 University of Idaho students, began. The case had captured national attention, and now, after months of investigation and growing public outcry, it was time for justice to unfold. The victims' families, still reeling from the unimaginable loss, sat in the front rows, their eyes fixed on the defendant. Every glance, every gesture, every word that came from Kohberger's defense team or the prosecution would hold immense weight. The prosecution's argument was clear from the outset. They presented their case methodically, laying out the mountain of evidence that pointed to Kohberger as the one responsible for the deaths of Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. The brutality of the crime, the evidence of premeditation, and the chilling nature of the murders made it a case that would haunt the public for years to come. From the first day of the trial, the prosecution pushed forward with a simple, undeniable claim: Bryan Kohberger had stalked his victims, meticulously planned their murders, and executed them in cold blood. One of the key elements that the prosecution focused on was the forensic evidence, specifically the DNA found on the knife used in the killings, which linked Kohberger directly to the crime scene. Investigators had also matched Kohberger's vehicle to footage from the area around the house the victims shared, placing him at the scene on the night of the murders. His cell phone data was another crucial piece of evidence. The phone's GPS showed that it had been in the area during the critical hours of the crime, and it had been turned off in a way that suggested deliberate efforts to conceal his movements. Perhaps the most damning evidence was the footage of Kohberger's behavior after the crime. A series of jailhouse recordings from his time in custody were presented, where Kohberger was heard making inconsistent statements. He spoke in a calm and detached manner about the murders, offering vague justifications for his actions, all while revealing a chilling lack of remorse. He had denied committing the murders initially, but as the recordings revealed, he was often evasive, shifting his responses and contradicting himself. It was these recordings, played in the courtroom for all to hear, that painted a picture of a man who was not just involved, but deeply connected to the horror of that night. The prosecution also highlighted the surveillance footage of Kohberger's car driving through the area multiple times before the killings, making it clear that he had been casing the house. His behavior on that night, methodical, deliberate, suggested an individual who had planned the murders well in advance. His academic background in criminal justice, which had once seemed an innocuous detail, was now seen as part of the chilling narrative. Someone who had studied criminal behavior and may have been driven by a fascination with committing the perfect crime. Throughout the trial, Kohberger's defense team worked tirelessly to discredit the prosecution's case. Their strategy was clear. They sought to cast doubt on the evidence, questioning the reliability of the DNA matches and phone data. They argued that there was a lack of direct proof linking their client to the actual murder. They tried to paint Kohberger as a victim of a flawed system, someone who had been unfairly targeted due to his academic background and prior interactions with law enforcement. His defense team sought to create a narrative where Kohberger was a scapegoat, someone who had been unjustly ensnared by circumstantial evidence and faulty assumptions. The defense also hinted at a possible plea not for a guilty verdict but for a lesser sentence. They suggested that Kohberger may have been suffering from a mental illness that clouded his judgment and affected his ability to make rational decisions. Throughout the trial, Kohberger sat motionless, occasionally glancing at the defense team, but his face remained unreadable. His reactions to the proceedings were sparse, but when the defense argued that he might have acted in a disoriented state of mind, Kohberger seemed to offer a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest that the defense had his ear. As the trial continued, new evidence came to light, some of which caused the public's perception of Kohberger and the case to shift. Forensic experts testified about the psychological profile of a killer like Kohberger, someone who might have harbored a deep sense of entitlement, someone who believed they could outsmart the system. Their analysis of his background revealed troubling details about his obsession with criminal investigations and the ways in which he had been following the case long before his name had been linked to the crime. Jailhouse conversations, which were recorded without Kohberger's knowledge, revealed even more. In these recordings, Kohberger seemed to grow increasingly agitated, offering fleeting admissions of guilt but never fully owning up to his role. He would talk in circles, avoiding direct confrontation with the gravity of his actions. Some of his statements gave the impression that, despite the mounting evidence, he still believed that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. One of the most shocking moments from the trial came during the testimony of one of the victim's close friends. This individual recounted the last time they had seen Kaylee and Madison, describing their excitement for the Thanksgiving break and how they had been looking forward to returning home. The friends spoke about their final interactions, painting a picture of vibrant, happy young women who had their whole lives ahead of them. This testimony left a profound impact on the jury and those in the courtroom, underscoring the tragic loss of potential that had been wiped out in a moment of violence. As the trial drew closer to its conclusion, the prosecution and defense each presented their final arguments. The prosecution's case was airtight, with evidence tying Kohberger to the crime in multiple ways, and with the growing suspicion that his desire for notoriety and power had driven him to kill. The defense, however, held firm to the idea that Kohberger had not acted of his own volition, but under the influence of something deeper, possibly a mental health crisis or some other factor that had impaired his judgment. The final moments of the trial were tense, filled with emotion as the families of the victims held their breath. The jury deliberated for hours, each juror weighing the evidence, the testimonies, and the complex psychological profile of the defendant. And then, the moment came. The judge, after a long pause, called the courtroom to attention. The room fell silent as he read the verdict: guilty on all charges. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps, tears, and quiet relief. The victims' families, though still consumed by grief, allowed themselves a brief moment of closure. The jury had found Brian Kohberger guilty of the murders of 4 young lives, and the court's decision was unanimous. As Kohberger sat motionless, his expression unreadable, the weight of the verdict seemed to press down on him. He had denied his involvement from the start, and now, in the face of overwhelming evidence, he had no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. Sentencing came shortly after the verdict was read. The judge, taking into account the brutality of the crime and the profound impact it had on the victims' families and the community, imposed a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kohberger's eyes remained fixed ahead, his face showing no emotion as the sentence was read aloud. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, paying for the lives he had taken and the future he had stolen from so many. For the families of the victims, the trial had offered a small measure of justice, but it was a hollow victory. The pain of losing their children, their friends, their loved ones, could never be erased. But at least the man responsible for this senseless tragedy had been held accountable. The case was closed, but the wounds it had left behind would never fully heal. As the courtroom cleared, the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan left with the weight of their loss still heavy on their hearts. The trial had ended, but the echoes of that night would remain forever. In the wake of the trial and conviction, the town of Moscow, Idaho, was left to grapple with the profound loss of 4 young lives, each full of promise, each with a future that would never be realized. The fallout from the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin reached far beyond the courtroom, extending its influence across the community, the victims' families, and even the broader landscape of criminal justice. Family and community reactions. For the families of the victims, the pain of losing their loved ones was not something that could be measured in words. Every single day since that cold November night had been a struggle to make sense of the unimaginable. They had raised children who were kind-hearted, intelligent, and full of life, yet their futures had been violently taken away. The families spent months in the public eye, balancing their grief with their fight for justice. They had witnessed the slow, painful process of the investigation unfold before them, followed by the trial, where every detail of their children's brutal deaths was laid bare for all to see. Yet despite the trauma, Their voices were resolute, speaking not just for their own children, but for the memory of all the victims. Each family carried with them a deep, unspoken desire to ensure that their children's stories were remembered as more than just the tragic headlines of the case. Kaylee's family wanted the world to know how determined she had been, always chasing her dreams with a fierce passion. Madison's family wanted everyone to remember how she had been the heart of every gathering, the one who could always make you laugh, who lit up any room she entered. Zana's family wanted to share the quiet determination that had driven her, how she had a love for life and an unshakable resolve. Ethan's family, too, wanted the world to remember the kindness he had shown to all, the joy he had brought to his friends and family, and the love he had for Zana. These were not just victims. They were real people with vibrant futures that had been violently stolen. The community of Moscow, once known for its warmth and peaceful way of life, now found itself forever changed. The murders had left a scar on the town, one that would take years to heal. In the days and weeks following the crime, the town rallied together, offering support in every way they could. Memorials were held, candles were lit, and vigils were attended by people from all walks of life. The community's solidarity in the wake of the tragedy was palpable, and the shared sorrow became a bond that connected residents on a deeply emotional level. Despite the grief, there was a collective sense of resolve, a determination to honor the victims' memories by ensuring that such a tragedy would never happen again. While some residents found comfort in community support, others were left questioning how something so horrific could have occurred in their quiet town. The search for answers would continue, but in the meantime, Moscow was bound together by its shared experience of loss. Media and social media reaction. The media coverage of the case was relentless, as the story of these young lives brutally cut short captured national attention. As more details emerged from the trial, the media played a central role in shaping public perception. Some outlets focused on the chilling facts, the cold, calculated nature of the crime, the surveillance footage, the forensic evidence that seemed to point inexorably toward Brian Kohberger. Other outlets, however, dwelled on the sensational aspects of the case, speculating on Kohberger's mental state, his background in criminal justice, and his apparent lack of remorse. The media's focus on Kohberger's psyche, his interactions with law enforcement, and his trial added layers of complexity to the public's understanding of the case. The victims' families, while grateful for the coverage, also felt that their children's stories were sometimes overshadowed by the fascination with the accused. On social media, the case sparked debates across platforms. People from around the world shared their opinions, with some offering sympathy for the families and others voicing their frustration at the pace of the investigation. True crime enthusiasts, already accustomed to following such cases, dissected every detail, from the phone data to the evidence found in Kohberger's car, often speculating on his motives and the psychological underpinnings of the crime. While social media helped bring attention to the case, it also created controversy. Conspiracy theories flourished, with some individuals suggesting that law enforcement had overlooked key pieces of evidence or had been too slow in their pursuit of Kohberger. The intense scrutiny of the case online led to backlash against the media, who were sometimes accused of sensationalizing the tragedy. The investigation became a battleground not only in the courtroom but on social media feeds, where speculation and misinformation ran rampant. For the families, this created an added layer of pain as they watched their children's deaths become fodder for debates and armchair detectives. Bigger picture discussion. The impact of this case reached beyond the small town of Moscow and the families directly involved. It highlighted serious issues related to campus safety, mental health, and the role of social media in both amplifying and distorting the truth. The case forced many to confront uncomfortable truths about how universities and communities handle issues of safety, especially when it comes to the well-being of students. For many, the case was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist even in seemingly safe environments. Discussions surrounding campus safety laws gained traction in the wake of the murders, with calls for universities to implement better security measures, increase awareness about mental health, and ensure that students are educated on how to stay safe both on and off campus. The case also raised important questions about criminal justice policies, particularly the role of mental health evaluations in determining culpability and sentencing. Kohberger's defense had suggested that he may have been suffering from a mental health crisis at the time of the murders, and this led to a larger discussion on the mental health system and its impact on criminal behavior. Advocates called for greater resources to support individuals who may be at risk of harming themselves or others, pointing out the need for early intervention before violent tendencies can escalate into tragic acts. Moreover, this case forced many to examine the role of online communities in true crime, particularly as they become more involved in investigations. While social media can help raise awareness, it can also complicate matters, feeding speculation and creating distractions for law enforcement. The case of Bryan Kohberger was no exception. His arrest sparked a flood of online discussions, some insightful, others harmful. The case underscored the tension between the public's fascination with true crime and the ethical responsibilities of both the media and the public in respecting the investigative process. In reflecting on the tragedy that befell the University of Idaho, the lessons learned are both profound and difficult. The loss of 4 vibrant young lives, each filled with dreams, aspirations, and the promise of a brighter future, teaches us how fragile life truly is. This case serves as a reminder of the importance of community safety and the critical need for mental health awareness. It underscores the necessity of intervention before violence escalates, and how societies must come together to provide support and resources to those who may be at risk. The importance of prevention strategies and the development of robust support systems cannot be overstated. The pain felt by the victims' families should be a clarion call for communities and institutions to better understand the needs of their most vulnerable members, ensuring that tragedies like this are not repeated. To honor the victims of this case, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, we must remember them as more than just the victims of a crime. They were individuals with incredible potential, whose dreams were cut short by an act of violence. Their legacies live on in the memories of those who loved them, in the impact they had on their friends, families, and communities, and in the changes they have inspired in the way we think about safety, mental health, and justice. As we reflect on their lives, we must ask ourselves how we can contribute to a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur. By raising awareness, supporting victims' families, and advocating for stronger preventive measures, we can honor their memories and work to create safer spaces for all. Resources for campus safety, mental health support, and domestic violence prevention are available for anyone in need. If you or someone you know is struggling, there are people ready to listen and help. You can find helplines and websites for these resources online, and we urge you to take the steps necessary to ensure that others do not have to endure the pain of such a tragedy. In closing, this tragedy reminds us of the preciousness of life and how deeply we must care for those we love. Share this story to raise awareness, and let us all be part of the solution, working together to prevent such violence from ever happening again.